Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of The Nation here on the Outlaw Nation. I am the Outlaw John Rocha, and today, trying something new on the channel because I've got a very strong interest in this Sam Bankman-Fried trial that is happening right now with crypto and FTX and Alameda and all of this going on. And I was talking with my friend and co-host on the Cine-Files, and he said, let's do something about it. And so we're going to talk about it. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome director, writer, producer, occasional actor and co-host of the Cine-Files, and that is my friend Steve Morris. Steve, how are you?
I'm pretty good. I thank you for giving me that occasional actor. It is occasionally true. In fact, last night I was reading a play with my son for a school assignment, and I was like,
nice.
This is fun. I like this acting thing.
It's not too bad. Yeah. When we do our episodes of the Cine-Files, for those of you who don't know, maybe the Cine-Files is a podcast we've been doing for about 8 years, Steve and I. We break down one great movie or one movie we really like and talk about it and break it down. And we've been very successful doing the podcast. And Steve and I have always talked about tech stuff when it's come up. We've always talked about, financial stuff when it's come up. And Steve, I know, is a massive, how can I say, it's massive nerd, for lack of a better term, about tech stuff, about financial stuff. And he was telling me how he was really kind of engrossed in this trial, engrossed in the story for quite some time. And so I just thought, well, it'd be fun because I'm kind of on the outside looking in on something like this. It'd be fun to have this discussion. For those of you who may not be as well versed in this stuff, Steve can clarify that and is kind of knowledgeable about, very knowledgeable about all this stuff, so that maybe you guys can feel like me. And for those of you who are hardcore into it, like Steve, you've got a voice for yourselves here on this interaction. And we don't know if we're going to do it weekly, if we're going to do it like every time there's a big bombshell, but we're trying this out to have this conversation. So Steve, let's get into your qualifications to talk about this. I think just the kind of for maybe new people who are discovering this channel or discovering this episode, what makes you supremely qualified to talk about this particular trial and what's going on here with Sam Bankman-Fried?
Well, I don't think I am supremely qualified.
Come on, sell it. If Sam can sell himself, you can sell yourself, for God's sake.
And Sam ended up on trial where I'm almost certain going to be found guilty. So no, I don't take that advice. Yes, I am definitely a geek. Yes, I've always loved tech stuff. I am definitely not a financial professional, and I definitely, anything I say, if you go out and make an investment based on something I say here, dude, you're on your own. That is, I am definitely am not at that level. But I've been hearing about Sam Bankman-Fried for years, and I first heard of him, like maybe most people did, in this really, really positive way.
Yeah,
because he was the guy who was going to clean up crypto. He seemed very transparent, and which we'll get into as we talk about it. He had this whole philosophy, which, whether or not we really believe this is true, is one of the interesting questions. And what I should say is part of how this conversation started with you is that we just did the Wolf of Wall Street on the Cine-Files, and that was 3 weeks of us digging into the most debaucherous, insane movie that I can think of. And I think we said that the guy, or at least I'll speak for myself, that Jordan Belfort, who the movie is based on, is, I believe the technical term, a scumbag. And embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars and used it to fuel his sex-filled, drug-filled, insane lifestyle.
Right.
And he did it in ways that were pretty crappy. And then I'm reading about Sam Bankman-Fried, who claims that his entire motivation is to do good in the world. And he stole not hundreds of millions of dollars, but billions or tens of billions of dollars. He dwarfs Jordan Belfort in every single way, and yet he does it without all the prostitutes and gambling and drugs and craziness that mostly
there were some
there might have been some prostitutes.
There's some allegations of prostitutes, yes.
but his lifestyle was not the same. And I started to go, well, wait, who's the bigger scumbag here? That's what really started to fascinate me. And I've been, after hearing about him initially with effective altruism and all the donations and political things that he was doing, I then I've read many books by Michael Lewis, and Michael Lewis, as you know, wrote the book that a movie that we did on the Cine-Files is based on, which is Moneyball, and also Flash Boys and Liar's Poker. And he is an expert at breaking down sort of these complicated things and digging into these worlds. And he signed on to write a biography of
Mm.
Sam Bankman-Fried before all this went down, and was meeting with him regularly when suddenly FTX goes bankrupt. And then and so suddenly he's sitting on this amazing book that he's in the middle of. And what he ended up doing, which I've listened to all of, and this is where I do say that I am pretty familiar with this material, is that he started taking all of his background interviews when he interviewed someone about crypto, or he interviewed someone about the law, or he interviewed someone about effective altruism, or all these elements, is he made it into a podcast. So for the last several months, every week, I've been listening to the background for the book. I listened to the book the day the book came out. And he also has a daily podcast on what's going on in the trial, which I've been pretty obsessed with, which is, I guess, what brought us here.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting person, a really interesting time in the world. And man, it really says a lot about how the financial system works and the delusions that someone can have to lead them to make the kinds of decisions that Sam Bankman-Fried made.
Yeah, well, let's. You mentioned already about his effective altruism. Let's go a little bit backwards to get maybe a little bit for people who maybe are kind of familiar or maybe don't have any familiarity with the story and are taking a chance to watch this video. Sam Bankman-Fried, and correct me on all of this as we go along, Steve, because as I said, a little bit on the outside looking in on this situation. He is the son of two Stanford law professors, and he had this motivation, what it seems like, or what he had said his motivation was to be able to use crypto to make a lot of money in order to make the world a better place, to donate to charitable causes that are about helping the world, to donate to politicians or about helping as many people as possible. This seemed to be his goal. And FTX was supposed to legitimize crypto, make it mainstream, and he wanted to make it clean. And as I said, make enough money to donate and all of this. And in the end, he ended up becoming one of the most richest people and one of the most quickly richest people, one of the youngest, most rich people, like rivaling Zuckerberg in the speed with which he achieved this billions and billions of dollars of worth. But he went from $32 billion at its height, FTX and Alameda, down to bankruptcy in 4 days, and it was arrested in the Bahamas and extradited to the U.S. And the basic complaint is that all these people were donating and investing in FTX, but he had set up a company called Alameda, and Alameda was taking money from FTX and investing in real estate in the Bahamas, doing these political contributions, and spending money in all these other places because Alameda was trying to invest and try to make more money. And when they found themselves in an $8 billion hole, they started taking money from FTX to fill the $8 billion. And eventually they couldn't meet the demands. There was an old school It's a Wonderful Life bank run on FTX, and they couldn't meet the demands. And that ended up causing the bankruptcy, we just mentioned a minute ago. Steve, clarification in addition to this essentially rough outline of what's going on here.
Well, first of all, I think your rough outline is excellent. I think that's all. That's all very much what happened. And but let's go back a little. Let's kind of go through it a little more piece by piece. So first of all, starting with this guy Sam Bankman-Fried. Yes, his parents are law professors. This, it's funny. We did Social Network a few months ago on the Cine-Files.
Yeah.
And while Mark Zuckerberg probably isn't really like entirely that character that we see in that film,
right?
There's a lot of Sam Bankman-Fried that is. This is a truly disconnected kind of person who sees life as a calculation. Yeah. Like he was a kid who didn't get along with other kids. He was didn't understand social cues, literally spent time trying to learn facial expressions and smiling in the mirror. Like this is someone who was really, the thing that he excelled at and the thing that made sense to him was mathematics and odds and risks and rewards and games. And that's sort of where he kind of found his place. Yeah. And so that's the first thing. And I think one of the things, and this comes from reading Michael Lewis's book, is that his tendency was when he would see a kind of human behavior that didn't make sense to him, is that he would reject that behavior as stupid. And so like one of the examples, which is that basically he went, when he had classes in school where they started to say, hey, write your opinions on this piece of literature. He was like, this is all opinions. Nobody can know the facts. There's no reason to do this. This is bullshit. And since you and I have both pretty much made our living in a lot of ways giving opinions on the meaning of art,
Right.
I would say that he's incorrect. He also believed that it was not mathematically possible for William Shakespeare to be the greatest writer of all time because there were so few literate people at the time. The populations were so low, and he lists all these calculations
Interesting.
that therefore, rather than evaluate the quality of the writing, which he's not capable of. And so the reason I want to say all that is that everything boils down to a calculation in his mind, to odds and risks. And so one of the things, he came from a family that continually talked about doing moral stuff, about what was right. And this was, and I believe it is true that this was very important to him. And the first philosophy he came to was one called utilitarianism. And basically the idea is that the best, most moral course is the one that gives the most good to the most people.
Right.
So, and an example of this is that, like, you would say if someone is walking by a stream and sees a child drowning and they're in their best suit, that it would be morally repugnant for that person to not jump in the water and save that kid, even if it means ruining your nice suit. And what he would say, or what utilitarianism would say, is that the fact that the only thing that makes that a special situation is that kid is right next to you. They're in your proximity. But if you could, for the price of your fancy suit, save 100 kids' lives who are starving somewhere, which you probably could, that is 100 times more correct to do. And yet, for some reason, we have a disconnect where it would be repugnant to not save that drowning kid, but we're totally fine driving in our Mercedes and ignoring people that are starving all over the world. Okay, so that's a utilitarianism philosophy. Okay. And I have issues with it, and but there's it's persuasive. That's step one. Step two is this idea of I just went on my brain, altruism. It's what's the actual phrase? Effective altruism. Sorry.
Effective altruism. Yeah.
So, and this comes from a bunch of different philosophers, but the key one is a philosopher called Will MacAskill. And what he basically said is, again, how can we do the most good for the most people? And we tend to give to charity emotionally. And so, again, another example is little Jimmy is trapped in the well, and the whole world spends millions of dollars and focuses on saving this one kid's life. Or we had those people that were in the submarine that the whole world focused. Well, there are people that are drowning on refugee boats in the Mediterranean that we're not caring at all about. And if we had spent the money, we could have much more effectively spent the money on the vast number of people. And they would even include, Will MacAskill would, the people of the future. Saving lives in the future. And so, again, and this appeals to Sam Bankman-Fried because it's a mathematical equation. Right. How do I do the most good in the world mathematically? And so one of the things that MacAskill brings up is like, well, you could become a doctor and you could work in some impoverished place and you could save hundreds of people. Right. Or you could become super, super rich and pay for 1,000 doctors to go work in that same place and save 1 million people. And this is the key to the decision-making process in his life, is he goes, oh, I want to be super rich so I can save millions of people. Now, do we believe that that's the case? I tend to believe that he believed that that's why he was doing it.
You do. Okay.
I believe that he believed it. Okay. Well, there isn't the sign. I mean, the guy wasn't, I mean, yes, we could talk about the penthouse and all the stuff. The guy wasn't that into money. It's not like Jordan Belfort, who was out, he was into making money, but he wasn't into the trappings of money, the beautiful people and all the world that we saw in Wolf of Wall Street. That's not how Sam Bankman-Fried was living.
Yeah. So let's make a delineation, because I do want to talk about this, because I think it is connected to obviously what we got with the dropout. Elizabeth Holmes, she's also the daughter of Stanford people. And so this,
and as a Cal fan, that's, this is, you always attack Stanford people, come on, go Bears.
Go Bears. But yes, but this is fascinating to me because, well, with Jordan Belfort, he's coming from a poorer situation, not a poor situation, but a poorer situation.
Right.
And his desire to make money is about status, and it's about being respected in the world. We see that in the portrayal in The Wolf of Wall Street, or the way he plays Jordan Belfort is this guy who is desperate to make this money so that he can do whatever he wants with it and go to excess. What we see with Elizabeth Holmes, what we see with Sam Bankman-Fried, what we see with these people who get caught up from this particular area, who already come from money, come from wealth. It's like Quiz Show, right? The Robert Redford film, that person there, I can't remember the gentleman's name, also a son of rich people who accomplish stuff. It's something where they feel the need to go and make something that is supposedly helping the world, but at the end of the day has a con man approach to it, in that they are taking advantage of people's altruistic instincts who have money and want to donate and help to create something better in the world, and they take from them and achieve these piles of cash and eventually get caught. And the defense is always, oh, it was someone else's fault, or the lawyers told me to do this, or I got caught up in this and it made a mistake. And we're supposed to, with one side of our brain, think they want us to see them as one of the most intelligent people on the planet to create something like this. And then they want us on the other side to go, oh, but they're kind of stupid enough to make a mistake that's so simple to make in this situation. And so to me, this is where I think the disconnect is. Jordan is driven by something else that Sam Bankman-Fried and Elizabeth Holmes are driven by. It's two different things. And I don't think for me, they're both equally corrupt. It's just in different ways in how they approach it,
Well, so I would just want to
argue, right? Because,
no. Well, I think he is corrupt.
Yeah.
I absolutely, the difference is, so first of all, does he actually believe that his motivation is for effective altruism and to do good in the world? That's one of the questions. It's not whether or not that is his motivation. I don't think it is.
Right.
I'm saying whether or not he believes is his motivation.
Yeah.
And one thing that we can connect, I think, with Jordan Belfort, and I know less about Elizabeth Holmes, but definitely with Sam Bankman-Fried, is ego.
Yeah.
His
100%.
ego is a massive motivation for him.
Elizabeth, the same way if you watch The Dropout. It's ego. Yeah.
Yeah. And now he's framed that as because I want to do good in the world. But the choices he makes, as you see what he does, is all about him believing his own infallibility and his own bullshit. Mm-hmm. And then, and again, and we've seen this many times of, like, in fact, when we did the film Crimes and Misdemeanors, Martin Landau's character is a character who embezzled money from his charity because of bad business investments, but still frames himself as a good man, because he can't be anything other than a good man, because he can't see that he's not. Sam Bankman-Fried continually said how messed up, and would expose some of the, the Ponzi nature of crypto, and said at one point, someone said to him in an interview, well, this sounds kind of like a Ponzi scheme, not talking about FTX or his own work, but just about kind of crypto in general. He's like, yeah, it is. Is that he was going around exposing that, and he was totally blind to, or seemingly blind. I can't know what he really thought, but he continually wasn't seeing that he was doing the same shit, that he was doing the same kinds of things. I also think that I don't think he was motivated in the sense of, now there was one thing where when they went to the Bahamas, because they had offices in Hong Kong, then they moved to the Bahamas, obviously for tax reasons. And then he kind of sent this guy out to buy up stuff for offices in the Bahamas, and the guy bought him a BMW. So when he showed up, and he and Carolyn Ellison, who is the woman that becomes his girlfriend, who obviously is an important witness, they're driving around in the BMWs, and then he decides, hey, this looks bad for my image. Let's switch this out for Priuses or Hondas or something like that.
It was Hondas.
Hondas, yeah. So it's like, he certainly was image aware. He also, though, wasn't, doesn't seem to me, and this is what Michael Lewis says, he wasn't enjoying the fancy $30 million penthouse in the Bahamas. He was working there and frequently sleeping in a beanbag chair because he wasn't capable of sleeping alone in a hotel room or sleeping alone. He would go to the office and work and sleep there because he had to be around other people, but couldn't talk to other people. I mean, this is a really weird guy. So so giving him like a conventional greed motivation, I don't think fits. I think the ego and wanting to be the richest person in the world, and the idea of this effective altruism, led him to do essentially not the same stuff as Jordan Belfort, and but a lot of the same basic stuff of breaking the essential rules, and stealing money from his clients.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. And I think this is where you and I will come to it from different points of views. And of course, I absolutely respect and appreciate where you come from, Steve, as learned as you are about this situation. But I'm much more cynical, and you know that at our interactions in our show, but I'm much more cynical about the world. And I take things through different prisms because of the things I've experienced. So when I see the way you explain Sam, it sounds to me like Hans Gruber at Die Hard, where I'm not just a thief, I'm an excellent thief, and I'm, graduating to kidnap. So he sees himself as elevated above the common thief. I imagine Sam Bankman-Fried sees himself as elevated about Jordan Belfort, but they're both equally corrupt and they're both equally after the same things. It's just lying to themselves that Sam Bankman-Fried is coming from a much more altruistic place, but a much more elevated place. And I would argue that there's no difference. It's just a lie you tell yourself. And the reason I say that is because I was listening to a podcast with the Daily and the New York Times writer that profiled him and went down to interview him and what have you. And he said that, he is, Sam Bankman-Fried was willingly saying, I'm sorry. He was tweeting out, blah, blah, blah. But he was also trying to create the narrative. Like, for example, here's a quote that he's blameless in this to a degree. I'm broke and wearing an ankle monitor, and I'm one of the most hated people in the world. And I did what I thought was right. So this idea of changing the narrative here, that I am just this altruistic person who made a mistake here, but look at this, the victimization. And we see this going on with Trump. We see this going on with so many people in our society who immediately default to the whole, like, look at me, look at how I look what happened to me. But my heart was in the right place. My mind was in the right place. I was trying to do good in the world. And that's all a smokescreen to showcase, to cover up the fact that in the end, yes, ego and money were the drive here, because the making of the money validated the ego that he was able to do these kinds of things. And I think in the end, there isn't that much of a difference between the two. And you can decorate one with degrees and one without. But to me, in the end, they're both equally corrupt.
So I am going to, I think, surprise you,
Okay.
which is, yes, we do come at this from slightly different directions. But in my opinion, what I am considering, I think Sam Bankman-Fried is far more corrupt than Jordan Belfort.
That's completely fair, because you would argue he should have known better, coming from much more intellectual people and learned and knowledgeable people, for sure.
Well, and part of it is because Jordan Belfort, I think he would say that he's a scumbag.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
probably.
Like, when he talks about in the scene where he's training the guys, he said, "Why would anyone buy money from you? You're a bunch of scumbags, or a bunch of losers, or a bunch of greasy salesmen," or whatever he says. The opening scene with Matthew McConaughey is all about your job is to take money from your client's pocket and put it in your own. Right. There's an honesty there that doesn't exist. And also, if you just talk about scale. Yeah. If we talked about this in Wolf of Wall Street, in comparing some guy that robbed a liquor store and got a couple $100 and went to jail for 20 years to this guy that robbed $200 million out of people's pensions and stuff like that. That's a complete difference in scale. Jordan Belfort is a far, far bigger criminal who gets far, far less punishment. Just on scale, Sam Bankman-Fried dwarfs Jordan Belfort. Right. There's no comparison to how many people his lives he ruined and how much money he stole. And for me, and maybe this is why I take it personally, as a person who comes from more money, from highly educated parents, who spends a lot of time thinking about those same issues of how do you do the most good in the world and effective. I relate, and who's sitting here in my cargo shorts and my t-shirt, like there's a lot of things. I think I have better social skills and a better understanding of people than Sam Bankman-Fried, but I get the guy. And to me, it is a greater betrayal. I am far angrier about Sam Bankman-Fried, because I think, and I want to go back to what you said, which is that it's all fucking about ego. Yeah. It's all about, like, I don't think that I do still believe that he believed that he was trying to do good in the world. But that to me makes it fucking worse. Because it's like, okay, you might have thought you had good intentions, and then you went down the same road of stealing, of lying about it, all because of your ego and to cover up your bullshit. And so your motivation, I mean, quite frankly, there are a lot of heinous humans who did heinous things because they thought they were trying to do good in the world. Yes, and true. Those are some of the worst people in history. That's why. So it's like, no, I think he's absolutely terrible, but he's terrible in a very complicated way.
Right. We just had an Oppenheimer film where you could argue, right, that his motivation there was to go after the Nazis. Then it became about his ego. And when it became about his ego, this was the end result, and the end result haunted him up until his death. So yeah, you're right. We don't know the consequences. Sometimes, even though we may have the altruistic motive, it can lead to something nefarious down the road, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Well,
And we should
and
give
Oppenheimer, and
Yep.
Oppenheimer, like, and again, I'm a Jewish man from San Francisco,
Mm.
where Oppenheimer was. My family immigrated to this country from the same generation, and that sort of, there is an Oppenheimer Sam Bankman-Fried connection,
Mm.
you know, that I think is, because I'm assuming although he's an atheist, his family is atheist, I'm assuming their background is Jewish,
Yeah.
is that like that intellectual tradition that leads to me, that also is similar, that I'm not comparing myself to Oppenheimer in any way, but it's also similar there. It's like, I think it's a cautionary tale of this, you
And
know?
there's also Jordan Belfort connections in that Jordan Belfort, as we saw and read, as we saw in the movie and read in the book, his father was involved with his stuff to
Yep.
try to help him kind of get out of the situation and not make these mistakes. It seems like Sam Bankman-Fried's father was much more involved in this situation, and there are accusations that him and his wife took money or took some money out of there, and so there's lawsuits against his parents about possibly profiting off of this situation as well. So it gets real dirty as the deeper you go into this story and the amount of money that's involved here, because we're looking at $8 billion plus dollars, and that's $8 billion is probably the generous assessment of the amount of money. It's probably much more, as you mentioned earlier here, Stephen. And just to give a little bit of background with this, FTX was set up as a crypto exchange company here, and essentially like a bank. And that's what basically the setup was here. It had Bitcoin, it had these places, but basically Sam Bankman-Fried had your money. And you have access to it, but he had your money, right? You could buy things, you could buy these coins, whatever. But then he set up the Alameda Research Fund, and that is the mechanism from which Sam would transfer money from FTX. And that Alameda Research was a hedge fund that was set up, and he put his on-again, off-again girlfriend in charge of that thing. And it seemed like from the messages that were released here that he gave to the New York Times, or allegedly gave to the New York Times, the reporter seems very clear that if Sam Bankman gave him this mess, that he showcased that Caroline was very insecure about taking over this fund, about running things, but she was very well aware of what Sam was doing and why he had set up that Alameda fund. And that's why I don't want to give him any kind of understanding or credit, because to me, he knew what he was doing every step of the way. And the prosecutors are accusing Sam of having programmed from the beginning this signature, this code in between the two computers there, the two computer systems between Alameda and FTX, where they would be able to take the funds out. And it was built into the system and the programming for both of those companies. So to me, that speaks of premeditated thievery. And so that's where I come down to with, I can't give him credit for altruism, because from the beginning, it seemed like this was rigged. This was a rigged game from the beginning, and he coded it as such.
So a couple of corrections. So
Please.
first of all, Alameda predates FTX. In fact,
okay.
Alameda is founded in 2017. FTX
is Sam Bankman-Fried the founder of it?
Yes.
Okay.
So in fact, Alameda is what he really wanted to do. Mm-hmm. FTX is like an offshoot. It's like an idea that came up in the process of Alameda.
Okay.
So what happened was, basically he was a Wall Street trader, and on, I think, Jane Street is the company that he worked for, made lots of money. And what not to get into that, if you read Michael Lewis's book Flash Boys and Liar's Poker and Going Infinite, which is the Sam Bankman-Fried book, he goes into all this stuff in detail. But basically, they're looking for opportunities where there's imbalances in the market, where you take advantage of inefficiencies in the market. And what a basic example is, and this is what Flash Boys is about, is all these electronic trades happen all the time by computers. They just make these decisions.
Right.
And the speed at which you get your information, as soon as the computer gets the information, it's going to make this trade. And so what they figured out was there was a race essentially to get the information from one computer to another faster. So they spent hundreds of millions of dollars building a special fiber optic line, or moved their headquarters 100 feet closer in order to get that information a microsecond faster, because it would give you an advantage on the trade. Right. Okay. So what Sam Bankman-Fried became is sort of an expert at this kind of thing, at understanding tiny little bits of odds and ways to take advantage of them. Mm-hmm. And then when he starts to learn about crypto, he goes, oh, this is a totally new market. We can use all of these tricks essentially to take advantage of inefficiencies in the market and make tons of money. So he forms Alameda. And they do things like where this Bitcoin is selling at 15% higher in South Korea than it is in the United States, but South Korea can't trade directly with the United States because you can't take the currency out. And so he does all these crazy shenanigans in order to take advantage of that 15% price gap and make lots of money. So that's the idea of Alameda. Okay. And as they do that, he's working with, I believe it's Gary Wang, who becomes the chief technical officer.
Yes.
And Gary Wang, on a spree, comes up with the code for a possible crypto exchange. And they go, wow, this is better than any crypto exchange anyone's ever come up with. And this seems cleaner and more efficient. Why don't we create a crypto exchange? And that's how FTX gets created.
Gotcha.
So Alameda comes first. But then what happens, and this is where I don't see it the way that you do, because the code that gave Alameda special trading privileges isn't initially in the FTX code. It happens later on when Alameda starts to go south. Right. So I think what to me, the narrative is more, it wasn't his intention to be a criminal. It's just that he was so confident in his ability to make these brilliant trades and make money that he stole from one pot to fund the other.
I feel like you're working for his defense right now, but okay.
I'm talking about his motivation. If I want to save some kid who's dying of cancer and I take a gun and rob a bank, I took a gun and robbed the bank. My motivation is immaterial. Like the fact that he had
but you'll get more forgiveness if you took a gun to rob a bank to save a cancer kid than if you took a gun to rob a bank and pocketed the money for yourself.
But he did exactly the kind of embezzlement you see all the time. My business is, and we've seen it in tons of movies, although none are jumping in my head at the moment. My business interests are going south. I'm going to steal a little money from my clients or from the bank in order to pay off my gambling debts or whatever. Right. That's what he's doing, is that he is gambling, and that at a certain point, because he's losing money on his own gambles, he starts gambling with FTX money.
Right. Instead of taking the losses,
exactly,
makes the decision to take money from his investors and money from the people who've deposited money and trusted him with their money at FTX. He uses that to fund Alameda, try to fill the $8 billion hole that he himself had created with his crew of people there in their inaccurate assessments and financial commitments to these things and investments that went south.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And he continually believes that he understands the odds better than anyone else. And what I find so frustrating about him is that he learns that he doesn't understand people, but he doesn't learn that he doesn't understand himself. And what I mean by that is that he still thinks that he's not a person, and that the normal rules don't apply to him, and that the normal human, because like one of the reasons that stock markets are irrational is that humans are irrational. Right. Is that they don't think logically about risk and gain, and therefore they make irrational choices. And people like Sam Bankman-Fried, who think they're hyper rational, learn how to take advantage of those irrationalities. So an example is that when he was at Jane Street, it's the 2016 election, and he goes, hey, the 2016 election is going to affect markets across the world. And he personally believed that if Hillary wins, the markets will go up, and if Trump wins, the markets will go down. Right. And so they decide, if we can figure out who's winning the election before everybody else, then we can make money off this deal with all the markets all around the world. And so they literally set up in-house the same kind of thing that, the networks have, of gathering all the information on the election. So they're literally spent millions of dollars to be able to gather the information on the 2016 election to get the answer of who's going to win a half hour earlier than it gets announced on the network, which they do. And they make all sorts of investments. And yes, the US stock market went way down when it opened the day after Trump won, but the international stock markets, they didn't give a shit. And so in fact, Sam Bankman-Fried lost Jane Street like $200 million, not because he didn't figure out how to find out what was going to happen before everybody else, but because he was predicting incorrectly what people were going to do. And the reason I tell this story is that he didn't learn his own fallibility from that lesson. He continued to see himself as someone who was smarter than everybody else, and therefore he continued to make bad bet after bad bet because he believed in his own infallibility, which is what he then had to get money from to cover up his shitty, which again is why it's about ego, you know?
Right. And this pattern still persists, though. And this is where I push away from this idea that I should have any sympathy for this guy or any understanding.
I don't think you should have sympathy for him. That's not what I'm saying.
I'm just saying overall, or any understanding of where this guy was coming from, or any factoring in this altruistic approach, because even after he was arrested, after he was extradited from the Bahamas, arrested, came to the United States, the judge said to him, don't talk to anybody, don't get in contact, don't do anything.
Yep.
And the prosecutors found out that he had initially tried to contact a witness with a kind of, let's hang out and talk and get our story straight. And this is what the prosecutors were able to get in front of the judge. And the second thing is he tried to circumvent the ability to get online by using some other system, another backdoor system, to get onto the internet and research the stuff and find out who was saying what about what, so he could have it. And the judge said to him, that's 2 strikes. And then the third strike was him releasing these notes that Caroline and him had conversations about for quite some time on Google Docs. And that was it for the judge. And his bail was revoked, which, by the way, was a $250 million bail, which is insane. And he was able to put it up. And his bail was revoked. He was transported from Palo Alto to New York, immediately put in jail in a Brooklyn correctional facility, which is known for being a pretty terrible place to be. And now his lawyers are complaining, well, he's a vegan. He can't eat vegan in prison. And, you know, his internet's going out and there's not enough battery in his computer to look at all these documents. So he doesn't learn the lesson, even when he's arrested, even when the judge is nice, probably because he's white with a lot of money, gets a $250 million bail, gets to sit at home at his parents' house in Palo Alto. It's still not enough for him to figure out that he's messed up here. So he pushes the boundaries and then gets his ass sent in prison. And now he wants his lawyers to kind of find a way to get him sympathy for this so he can get vegan meals in prison. Screw that nonsense. You know, to me, this is where I kind of hit my limit on all of this, because there's not a learning of the mistakes, and there's a repetitive pattern of pushing the boundaries, thinking he knows better, and getting burned every single time, and somehow ignoring the consequences. And now his defense is throwing everybody under the bus, including his on-again, off-again Caroline Goodall.
Ellison.
Ellison, who he installed as the CEO of Alameda, possibly so he could do the things that he was doing.
So I totally agree. And it's crazy to me that there is not just one, but 2 very, very public trials going on.
Yes.
Where the main defendant doesn't seem capable of shutting the fuck up, listening to lawyers, or doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I didn't want to make too much of a connection, but you're absolutely right, Steve.
I mean, I think that as people, they're very different, except for this one area of ego, narcissism, and arrogance. Is that I don't think Sam Bankman-Fried's personality is anything like Donald Trump's, but in believing that they are special and the rules don't apply to them, they are the same. Again, I don't think that he brought in Carolyn Ellison in order to do this shifty stuff, but I do think he brought in all sorts of people. And this is what it's so much more. If you read this book, it's so much more a story of incompetence than of evil. And I'm not saying that their actions weren't evil. They 100% were. They stole billions of dollars from people. But there was no organizational chart for the organization. Nobody knew who reported to who. And everyone and because Sam Bankman-Fried, like he went, oh, I need to learn how to manage people. So he read a couple management books, saw that they contradict each other, said, these are all bullshit. They're obviously, nobody knows anything about how to manage people. I'll just make it up. And this is what he did throughout everything. And of course, yes, there are management books that have different opinions on how to do stuff, but there are correct ways that you do stuff in an organization, particularly an organization where you deal with lots of people's money. And their default, because most of these people, by the way, signed on to this job as effective altruists, and part of their plan for the company was, we're going to give 90% of everything we make away. And because of that, they put more trust in the systems, their shitty systems, than they should have, because they thought Sam is a good guy. And I will say again, I think Sam thought that Sam was a good guy, but they didn't have, you need to actually have all these systems in place to protect stuff, which they never did. They never bothered to. And so, and Carolyn Ellison came in. I mean, look, I don't know enough about her to say definitively. These are a lot of really, really young people with really, really minimal experience that are suddenly put in charge of these massive, massive amounts of money and these extremely complicated systems, and they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Like there's a reason that you have your money in a bank, and a bank has all these systems, hopefully including FDIC insurance, to protect your money. None of that exists in FDX. They don't have any of these systems. And when so I listened to the guy who came in, who's the new CEO of FDX, who is the bankruptcy expert. That is his job. He comes into companies after they declare bankruptcy. He's the guy that came in to Enron. After Enron. Yeah. So he came in, and what he said in this interview was this company was, he didn't say a fucking mess, but that's what he said. He said the lack of control, the lack of oversight, they had no systems in place, the most basic systems to protect things from malfeasance. And you could say, and I could see you ready to say it, that this was all on purpose in order to, but I don't think it is. Having listened to Michael Lewis's book and listened to the lead up, I think this is so much more, and the crime is the same, but I don't think they went in to rob people because Jordan Belfort was smarter in the way he robbed people than Sam Bankman-Fried. I mean, this is stupid. He's a terrible criminal if that was his intent.
But that's what I'm getting at. And it's two things. It's one, if this guy's supposedly one of the most intelligent people on the planet who thinks the rules don't apply to him, it would seem to make sense that he could have the forethought to have a messy business so that he'd have multiple fall people, not fall guys, fall people, because he's been throwing Caroline under the bus, to take the blame for all of this. And he could escape scot-free, saying in essence, oh, I didn't know any better, or I made a mistake. It's a simple mistake, blah, blah, blah. So it's what I said earlier at the beginning of this thing. I don't buy people who want us to believe they're supremely intelligent, but fuck up in the most simplistic ways. I can't give you sympathy for that. But to me, I can't, because with great power comes great responsibility. If you've been endowed with great intelligence, you have the responsibility to use it correctly. And the basics of constructing a business, that's 101 that you could buy in a book. So tell me why he didn't do that. Tell me why no one wanted to make them do that. Young people start companies all the time at 15 years old with better structures of businesses and are intelligent as well and make money doing it. I mean, you can start a business right now and go for it and understand who should be in place and whatever. So to me, I just don't buy this notion that it's a simple oversight and whatever, that we just didn't see it and we just didn't put it together. We can study all this crypto shit. I can figure out how to do the South Korea versus America stuff, but I can't figure out the basic concept of business and how to construct a hierarchy in a company. That to me, that's where I go, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it.
See, and I see it very differently because, and by the way, you perfectly reasonable opinion.
No, I know, and I love we're having this discussion on two different points of views on it. Yeah.
In my experience, I've interacted with and then read about and seen all sorts of brilliant fucking people who are absolute morons in the areas where they're not brilliant. And you probably have too. Certainly, we know lots of artists.
I'm certainly a moron in certain areas for sure, and I think
I am too. I mean, like there's a set of stuff that's just like no. Well, we talked about it many times. It's like marketing, fundraising, networking, all that stuff. I'm the fucking worst. I am terrible. I, however, am aware that I'm terrible. Is that what Sam Bankman-Fried got all the time? Is you are so brilliant, you are so brilliant, and the areas of his life, which was understanding how people work and also understanding his own limitations, he didn't see them. He ignored them, and didn't
he ignored them. And
exactly.
And I wonder if his dad don't tell me his father didn't go like, well, how's this work? Where's the system set up? Who's answering to who? He's a lawyer, supremely intelligent, I imagine. And from Stanford, he should have been able to figure out what was happening here. But I think Sam ignored people. I'm sure there are people came in and talked to him like, dude, you're messing this up. But he ignored them.
Well, and part of it, and it's because he had so much success. And there's an incident, by the way, which I'll get into at Alameda that's really important in setting this up, which actually is more to your point. But when he's working at Jane Street, he makes $300,000 his first year. His second year, he makes $600,000 with $1 million bonus. They say that he's going to be making $15 million a year within a few years. That's how successful he is. And this is as a kid. He's 20, early 20s. So the story around him is this is the great genius. And everyone comes to him because he is the great genius. And to be clear, he's around a whole bunch of super smart people, and all those super smart people are like, he's way smarter than me, all of which might be true. But that blinds him to the fact, like the story about the Donald Trump story of like, what lesson did you learn? And the other one is, this isn't the first time that Alameda went south. Alameda lost like $80 million or something like that. I mean, like literally they couldn't find it. I don't remember what the exact number is. It was a ton of money. And everybody is freaking out. And Sam is like, it'll turn up. No big deal.
Oh my God.
And it's all because and this is just sloppiness. Like they don't know, because they're running these complicated financial schemes, and somewhere the money left there and never showed up, and they don't know where it is. And so half of these effective altruists who join the company say, we want all out, and we want all our fucking money. And all of that effective altruism stuff, when suddenly that seems to go out the window a bit, and now whether or not they still plan on donating tons of their money or not, I don't know. But they were at that moment, they're like, I want my money. And Sam Bankman-Fried is like, we need to push forward harder, not pull back and be more cautious. And they're going, no, pull back and be more cautious. Finally, he buys them out. And they do eventually find the money, and he pushes forward more aggressively. Yeah. And it is that moment that FTX booms and Alameda booms, and suddenly within the next year or two, he is worth at least $20 billion, the richest person under 30 to hit that level ever. And it could have been, he might have been worth $50 billion. We actually don't really know what he was worth because it was so fishy. And so that to him, to me, that should be the cautionary tale of, fuck, we misplaced millions of dollars. We should probably be really, really careful about this stuff. Maybe our systems aren't good. To Sam, it was evidence that I'm right and all those people who doubted me are wrong. And so that's why he continues to do these things. And he just throws money around. I mean, it's crazy the way he throws money around over the next year,
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick break, and then we're going to get into the trial and kind of update everybody about what's going on with the trial and have our thoughts about what's happening here with the testimonies and what have you from people who've known Sam, worked with Sam, were the co-founders, and of course, Caroline as well. So we'll be right back right after this. All right, Steve, we've taken a break. We've had a little bit of a drink, as you just had. Let's get into the trial here. What he's being charged with is essentially wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering, which is all connected to his misuse of his customers' money. And as I said, the prosecutors have discovered certain things in terms of the code that they found that was able to be used by FTX and Alameda, kind of backdoor these funds to Alameda to cover the $8 billion plus in losses. And they have gotten three people to essentially turn state's evidence against Sam Bankman-Fried here. Caroline Ellison being the first one, but also Gary Wang and Ashad Singh, who were two top deputies who knew Sam Bankman-Fried well before he was a household name. I think one of them met him in math camp or whatever. So these three people have essentially accepted their fault in this whole situation, and they are giving state's evidence. Caroline just testified, I think yesterday, a couple of days ago, and they're essentially, this is what the prosecutor is relying on, because normally a case like this takes years to come to trial because you got to untangle all this stuff, and a lot of people don't want to give evidence, don't want to turn on the people who help them make money. But in this case, the reason the trial has come on so fast is because these three people have turned on Sam Bankman-Fried and are willing to testify against him and take whatever punishment, reduced, I imagine, that they're going to take for their roles in all of this. And Sam Bankman-Fried is pleading non-guilty and not guilty, and saying that it wasn't his fault, that he just made a mistake, and that these were the people that were involved more than me. And he's blaming the two law firms that essentially okayed all the things that he did, Sullivan and Cromwell being one of the law firms. And that law firm, ironically, is now in charge of the bankruptcy and getting the money back for the investors, has made $100 million plus in being in charge of this bankruptcy. So it kind of adds a little more fuel to Sam Bankman-Fried's point of view that this was all set up by them and that he was an unwilling victim of them. And that law firm and the other law firm were the ones who worked in cahoots to essentially screw Sam Bankman-Fried over. And this was their plan from the beginning. So it is really an interesting myriad bunch of things going on here in all of this, but certainly fascinating when you look at it. So what are your thoughts on the trial so far and all this stuff that we are discovering in terms of defense and prosecution?
So you know how on the Cine-Files we spoil every movie and we say at the beginning, like, hey, if you haven't seen this, we're going to tell you how it ends.
We do.
I'm going to tell you how this ends. He's going to lose. That's the real story.
He's looking at 100+ years, Steve.
I was listening to Michael Lewis talking about the trial, and what he said when the trial started, I mean, to go to federal court in it like this, they don't take you to court unless they're real sure they have a real good case. It's actually the moment in Wolf of Wall Street when the prosecutor says that they have a grenada, that's so first of all, they have a really good case. And Michael Lewis said that when the trial started, before it started, he thought it was 50-1 that he was going to be found guilty.
Right.
He said a week into the trial, he thinks it's now 200-1.
Wow.
Like he thinks that it's so that the defense has been weak and that the prosecution is painting a very clear case, because everything I've read, everything I've heard in the trial, every single piece of evidence points to who was in charge, who made this decision. Sam Bankman-Fried did. It shows up in the memos going back and forth. It shows up in the testimony. The testimony is all consistent and saying like, oh, Carolyn Ellison was upset because of their personal relationship, or none of that stuff is holding up. It's just not. Like the reality is this was a company based on one person's vision. Like when you talk about particularly like the Macintosh and Apple, well, Steve Jobs was in charge. There was nobody who was going to say that Steve Jobs was in charge of the building of the Macintosh. Right. Anyone who tried to say that, it is ridiculous. This is Sam Bankman-Fried's company. There's no question about it. Throughout the whole thing, the philosophy, the decision-making process, and all those little things like giving Alameda special access or a huge line of credit in FTX, all that stuff was decisions made by him.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, it's kind of connected to how Trump is handling things now in terms of the documents, classified documents. Oh, the lawyers all said I could make this case. The lawyer, I found the right lawyers to support my point of view that something was stolen. Therefore, it's their fault, or it's the people who gave me advice. It's John Eastman's fault, or it's Mark Meadows' fault, or it's all these other people's fault but mine. And these other people should have known better, and they advised me, so therefore I'm innocent in all of this. And it's everybody else who I'm going to throw under the bus, and it's not my fault. And it comes back to that again, and I think this is a reflection which I have a real hard time with lately, Steve, for myself. And look, I've made mistakes in life, and I've tried to take responsibility for the mistakes that I've made in my life when I can. But I also look at this situation, and I find this fascinating because Americans are fascinated by people who make a lot of money, but there's also another part of America that wants those people to pay in bigger ways than they usually do. And we talk about Jordan Belfort. At the end of that movie, we see he's essentially been sent to a country club to be in prison, and everyone wants advice from him, and he ends up using that to parlay himself into a motivational speaker once he gets out. Elizabeth Holmes, finally, it took forever. They finally put her in prison for what she did. And she tried to sell everybody and throw everybody, tried to accuse that she was under some kind of sexual assault situation where she was mentally messed up and made these mistakes. So there's all these excuses rather than, you know what? I did it. I was trying to do this. It's my fault. I take responsibility. I think I would have more respect for somebody who was more willing to say, I did it, and not try to throw everybody else under the bus than someone who's doing that and trying to throw everybody else under the bus. This is where I have issues with his defense,
Well, you should have issues with it. He's guilty, and that is exactly what he's doing. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. It's also what you do. I mean, like that,
Right.
like if you're not going to say I'm guilty, which obviously I believe he is,
Yeah.
well, then you have to discredit the witnesses. That any good defense attorney will say, well, we have to make it look like these people are. And so that makes sense. I want to go back to two things you said, which is one, I agree with about how we think of rich people in this country, is that I think built into the American psyche is the idea that rich people on some level must be better than other people.
Yes.
And that is why they're rich.
Right.
And that is not fucking true. Yes, there are amazing people who are self-made people who are special. That is true. but being born rich does not make you special at all. And continuing to be rich, having been born rich, does not make you special. And which brings us, of course, to Trump. And I want to highlight one difference, I think, between Sam Bankman-Fried and Trump is that, and on the Cine-Files, we try to not get political and we largely fail. And we're on The Nation now, so I'm not going to worry so much about that. Fair is enough. That I believe that Donald Trump, I don't believe, I am stating the fact that Donald Trump is a professional bullshit artist. And I don't just mean that he is full of shit, although he is. I mean that his profession throughout his life has been bullshit. Yeah. That is what he has done in every endeavor. Everything is, how does he sell to the world a line of bullshit? My companies are worth more than I say they are. I lie to the taxes. I lie here. And I spread all kinds of stories and lies about my life and everything else to get people to invest in my stakes, my casinos, my universities, whatever the hell it is, whether it is true or not. He is an expert. He is a lifetime expert of obfuscating, changing the story, changing the narrative, changing the blame, and misdirection. That is what he does. And as much as I do not admire him, I have to admit that guy is really, really good at it. Sam Bankman-Fried is not. Okay. He does not have this set of skills. He might have had the set of skills to move a lot of numbers around and move math around and understand a bunch of stuff that I couldn't figure out at all. But he doesn't understand people. He doesn't understand how they work the way that Trump does. Trump does have a good understanding of how people work. Yeah. And Sam Bankman-Fried is not going to be successful in changing the narrative of this story because that's not what he's good at.
Okay. So then when you see people turn, and I think you make excellent points here, Steve. So let's focus on the trial here. What has surprised you about some of the testimony, or what has stood out for you of some of the testimony over the last few days this week in the trial? And as I said, these are going to be kind of dated episodes because we're doing this on October 18th. Wednesday, October 18th is when we're recording this. Wednesday, October 18th, 2023 is when we're recording this. So at this point in the trial, what has stood out for you from some of the testimony of the people who've gone up, including Caroline?
Well, one of the first ones is Gary Wang, Michael Lewis described as the most silent person that he had ever met. Like he couldn't get an interview. He would sit in awkward silences with him for hours and couldn't get him to answer a question. And it finally became so painful and awkward that he just said, you know what, I guess we're going to stop. Apparently, when he got on the stand, he talked a blue streak that the judge and the court stenographer told them that he had to slow down because they couldn't follow everything he was saying. That's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing I think is particularly both with him and with Adam Udia and with what is his name? Nishad Singh. Yeah. With all of them, it's not surprising, I guess, but the desire to separate themselves and go, it's the opposite of what we were saying about Sam. This is Sam's company. It's all on him. Right. But all these people were actually, they're sort of a little bit of pearl clutching, and I didn't really know what was going on. It's like, no, you wrote the code that allowed Alameda to have access. This is Nishad Singh. If you knew you were writing code that gave Alameda special because basically the way this worked is you have all these clients of FTX and you get to have your account. And with that account, you have privileges on what you can do with it. Well, Alameda was just another client of FTX, except that what was written was in this code was it had special privileges to access the funds that no other client of FTX had. Yeah. And then Sam Bankman-Fried would go on and people would ask him, hey, Alameda doesn't have special access. And he says, absolutely not. Of course not, which is one of the big fraud charges. He very publicly said it didn't have special access when he very clearly knew it did. But the people that, Nishad Singh writing that code, Nishad Singh, look, you wrote the code. You knew that what was going on. And so you can't act so shocked later on when you find out that $8 billion is missing. Caroline Ellison, first of all, I feel absolutely terrible for her because one of the craziest things about it, and I don't even understand this, she didn't have equity in Alameda. She was the head of Alameda, but everybody else had equity in the company. So you're dating the girl that you made the head of your company, and for some reason she's the one person that doesn't have equity in the company. That is completely insane and bizarre.
Yeah.
Also, by the way, the Google Doc memos they sent back and forth, analyzing their relationship, man, talk about some crazy nerdness.
Yeah.
It is, like she writes to him, she wrote a document, like a pros and cons document in the third person, and then ended up sending it to him of the good things and bad things about their relationship. And then he responds in this completely cold. And I mean, it's just so bizarre what this relationship is. And I feel terrible for this. She wasn't qualified to have this job. She gets thrown into this position and is suddenly in charge of it. And now this is her life. I mean, her life, this is it for her,
Yeah, but
and
she was also
but she's
complicit, right?
totally
Because
100%.
she made up nicknames for certain things to cover
Yep.
what they were meaning. Like when they were trying to bribe these Chinese officials, they called it the thing. And she was also complicit in chatting with him. I can't remember the name of the app where it disappears. Signal, right, where the message disappears as soon as it's read so that they can't track you legally. So I get it. On again, off again girlfriend. She was LARPing is when they met, when she was going away to be a wood nymph or something. And so I get it. Nerds. And I get it. She's like skinny and waifish. And she started crying on the stand, talking about it as her testimony was going further and further into what happened at FTX. I get it. But I also don't want to necessarily look at someone who's maybe physically frail and go, I feel sympathy for them. She knew what she was doing. She participated in it. Should there be a little more understanding, perhaps, because of the on again, off again situation? Was he grooming her, mentally manipulating her, putting her in these positions, using his affection, again, using his knowledge of certain things, playing dumb about it, but also using his knowledge of certain things to be able to manipulate her? That's where I think, for me, I'll have a little more understanding if that gets highlighted a bit more and we hear more about that as the trial goes along. But I don't want to necessarily give her the sympathy or whatever just because she looks like someone who could break in half if she fell down wrong, And so there has to be an understanding. Brains don't necessarily equal massive muscle or whatever. So it has to be the usage of how you did that has to be looked at, your brains.
I think you confuse my sympathy with...
No, I'm not saying you. I'm saying people overall have been trying to be overly sympathetic to her. And I think this needs to stop.
Because I can't turn... It's just how my brain works. My empathy is just turns on. Yeah. And it doesn't have to do... I mean, there could be a trial for a person who committed a heinous murder, and I hear their story and I feel sympathy for them because I empathetically feel the thing that they're going through. That doesn't mitigate in any way what I think a person's crime is or what you know what I mean? Like that's, you've known me long enough. My nature is that I'm always going to look at the other side to the point where my friends labeled me a contrary fuck and got irritated with my habit of always look. So, it's like,
this is why I enjoy our discussions.
Yeah. I mean, if someone comes to me with relationship issues and says they had this big fight and their girlfriend did this horrible thing, I'm thinking through, well, what was their girlfriend's perspective and why did they do that thing? And because I have sympathy for, whatever conflict is going on, I'm feeling different sides. So I feel for Carolyn Ellison, who is in a terrible position. Carolyn Ellison is a accessory to a massive fraud that stole. Again, I go back. The size of this crime is... there is plenty of guilt to go around. Yeah. Let's say that she's 1% responsible for what happened. And I think she's more than 1%, but let's just say it's 1%.
Sure.
Well, if they did steal $8 billion, doing some quick math in my head, 1% of $8 billion is $800 million. So she stole $800 million.
Yeah.
If we give her the 1% responsibility, and she's far more responsible than that. Again, that's 4 times what Jordan Belfort stole, and that's millions of times what someone stole when they robbed that liquor store that they're going to get 20 years in jail.
Yeah. It's an interesting situation as you go through the trial and listen to these testimony. And I tend to agree with Michael Lewis because the more you hear from the witnesses...
Sorry, bad math. It was 80 million is 1%.
Oh,
I couldn't let that stand, John. That was terrible math.
Well, Steve won't be taking any money anytime soon. But yeah, the whole situation here is just fascinating to listen to them talk about their interactions with him, and that you know, Caroline spoke about the fact that he like thought in his head he could be president of the United States. And this is the hubris that we're dealing with. You know, when you speak about having empathy with Caroline, which I can understand for sure, young girl in a situation here, perhaps there's some mental manipulation or quote unquote grooming going on in some way. Certainly we've all been subject to that. We don't know her state of mind, her insecurities, or whatever was going on. And if you read those back and forth between them, it's pretty painful in the ways that she is trying to tell him, like, I can't do what you're asking me to do. This job is beyond me. I'm nervous about it all the time. But then there's audio of her at a company meeting flat out admitting that they're going to borrow money or take money from FTX in order to make up for the money they've lost in those investments for the $8 billion. So you see her say, you hear her saying it in the audio, and that's so she is complicit just right there with her voice with it. But how did she get into that position? That's the conversation that we need to have, that we'll have in court as well in all of this. But this is where I come back to where I don't have all this sympathy for Sam Bankman-Fried. I'll have it for Caroline, and I don't have it for the other two guys probably. But for Sam, I don't have any, because this feels to me like he was manipulating this from the beginning and lied to himself that he was doing this for the altruistic point of view. You're saying that you thought he was altruistic in his intention initially, and then all just kind of went sideways. And I think this is more about he knew how to game the system, and he got a kind of perverse satisfaction and ego stroke that he could keep gaming the system. Because this is my opinion, one of the hidden truths that people don't talk about is intelligent people. There are maliciously intelligent people who actually get a kick out of being smarter than other people. And it's certainly very clear in the nerd community, right? The community that used to be beat up by all the jocks has now taken over the world, and they've essentially become what they beheld, as Costner says in The Untouchables, and they have become the bullies. They have become the evil contingent at times against the rest of the world, and they get sick, perverse joy out of taking money from other people or having their ego stroked and achieving a certain level of success so they can treat other people like crap. And so that to me is where it becomes a bit more, for me, I look at it as a bit more evil, because jocks are just dumb and do the things that they do physically against people. This is almost worse because you know better, and you know that you are hurting people in such profound ways, you know?
So I would like, again, you know, just as I said that people ascribe special something to people that are rich.
Yeah.
They also, ascribe special things to intelligence.
100%.
And it's like, if you saw a guy with big muscles, you would not have any knowledge about whether or not this was a good person, a bad person, an extrovert, an introvert.
Right.
All you know is they have big muscles. And if you looked at the types of muscles, you might be able to go, oh, I think this person works out.
Yeah.
That's all you get to know. If you know that someone is intelligent, if they're good at math or have a good memory or good with words, that's all you know about them. That does not translate. Someone's mathematical skills has nothing to do with their morality or their sense of justice or their honesty or their kindness or anything else. It means nothing. Intelligence is just an attribute, and it's like as a geek, Sam Bankman-Fried played D&D. He knows that intelligence and wisdom are on two different attributes, and they have nothing to do with your alignment of whether or not you're lawful or chaotic good or lawful evil or whatever. They are different attributes. And so that is what's true of him, is that he gets this idea, and again, when I say sympathy, it's because I imagine what it would feel like to be that person and what you're going through emotionally at that moment. It doesn't mean that I think that's a lessening of any of their crimes. Their crimes are their crimes. And I think I've kind of said it obliquely, but let me say it directly. I think that we treat white collar crime like with slaps on the wrists when we should reverse the whole dynamic.
I agree.
We should be much more careful about what we do with a 17-year-old kid who got caught dealing drugs and be really, really thoughtful about that. And when people embezzle millions of dollars, we should fucking destroy them. That's what I think.
I 100% agree. I think they should be in jail for the rest of their lives, because I'm tired of seeing white collar criminals get away with slap on the wrist. I'm tired of seeing people who can afford higher ended lawyers getting themselves out of these situations. I mean, Elizabeth Holmes, it took them forever to put her in jail. She was convicted like 2 or 3 years ago, and it took them that long to finally put her in jail. And she tried to have babies to get out of this situation and claimed she was a new mother. She couldn't possibly go to jail, got herself pregnant to try to get out of jail. In my opinion, not saying that that's actually what happened, but it felt like, looking at the timing and all of this. And so to me, this is where they're gaming the system consistently. And people who are less able to do that get punished more severely. And that shouldn't be what happens in our country. So yes, I agree with you. I know you don't agree with the death penalty situation, but I agree with you in terms of these sentences need to be much longer, and they don't get to go to country clubs. They have to go to the worst kinds of prisons and deal with that, so they can finally understand what they did and pay the price for what they did.
Two things, just to contrast your story about Elizabeth Holmes and how hard it was to get her into jail. Contrast that with someone someone accused, arrested for a minor crime, who can't make bail and is sitting in county jail while their family goes bankrupt because they can't do their job. Means they can't make the money to make bail, so we pay for them to be imprisoned when they have committed no crime, when they haven't been convicted of a crime. Could not get that fucking sentence out. But I mean, that is just a complete, and not to mention the people that are being detained for immigrating to the US without papers, and they're sitting in facilities being held without cause, and yet we slap someone who committed a financial crime, who has lots of money, has every ability to stall. That's the first thing. And the second thing I wanted to say, I have completely forgotten. So it's gone. Oh no, I remember what it was.
Okay, great.
So I was reading the Horatio Hornblower novels, which are the classic, C.S. Forester stories. And one of the things, and it just hit me so hard, is he's a lieutenant. He's like a 19-year-old lieutenant, and his ship gets captured, and all the officers get what's called their parole, which means that they're in France and they can just wander around free. And because they're officers, they're staying in a nice house and eating nice food, and they're doing whatever the hell they want. And all the men, because there's a split between officers and men, who could be someone who's 60 years old, who's been serving on a ship their entire life, they're in a tiny, tiny little prison eating bread and water under horrible conditions. And it is because there is a separation of class in terms of how certain people should be punished. And the officers who are gentlemen should be punished in the nicest, most civilized way. And the men who are, as the Duke of Wellington said, the scum of the earth, they get treated differently. And even though we don't live in a class system theoretically today, that is exactly what happens. Is that if you've got money, you get the good lawyer, and you get an entirely different journey through the legal system, or through the tax system, or through every other system in the world. And if you don't have money, you live in an entirely different country. And that is not how this country should work.
100% agree. 100% agree. All right, so we're going to be diving into this trial as it goes along and having conversations about it. Steve and I are now going to add another element to our friendship here by going back and forth on this and deciding when we're going to do episodes. So this will pop up every once in a while, maybe weekly, maybe twice a week, depending on the situations here. But we are determined to cover this trial to see what the end result of all of this is going to be, because it's all supremely, supremely fascinating. And we'd love to hear what you all think about the whole situation here. Sam Bankman-Fried, Caroline Ellison, the two gentlemen who were involved here who turned on Sam Bankman-Fried as well, ATX, Alameda, his parents that were involved. We've done the best we could at this point to cover as much of this as possible, and the trial at this stage on Wednesday, October 18, 2023. I'm sure there's more to come as we go along with this trial as well, but we'd love to hear you all's thoughts about it down there in the comments section. Hit a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, please. And I want to thank my co-host on the Cine-Files, my friend, first and foremost, Steve Morris, for joining us. And Steve, please let people know where they can find you and what you got going on.
So you can find me at SR Morris on Twitter and SR Morris1 on Instagram. And as we, talked about the Cine-Files, if you haven't checked the show out, I think every fan of the nation and of the Outlaw should check out the Cine-Files. It's a no-brainer. And if you want a relief from the intensity of what's going on in the world today, right now we are in the middle of our exploration of one of our favorite films, which is 1997's Men in Black, starring Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. We've been having an absolute ball discussing that. So check that out on the Cine-Files.
There you go. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Y'all take care of yourselves. Be well. And we'll talk to you next time with a brand new episode of The Nation here from the Outlaw Nation. Peace until then.